Director Paup is the newest, but not new, director at the Development Board, appointed back in 2018. Welcome.
You.
Brooke is an attorney. She's spent her career in public service at both the Comptroller's office as well as at the AG's office, and we're so excited to have you now officially in the water world. So with that, I am going to turn it over to you to provide a keynote and give you a warm tagged Groundwater Summit welcome.
My gosh, well, thank you, Leah. It's so great to be here at TAG. Y'all, I'm Director Brooke Paup. I'm the attorney at the Texas Water Development Board. Again, so happy to be here. This is such an important association. You know, when I got the first invitation to be the keynote here, Leah's instructions actually made me chuckle a little bit. She said that she wanted each presentation and all the slides to be interesting. So that meant that I had to basically discard half of my speeches that I've given currently. I dusted off an old one that I really loved and added some groundwater information, and I think it'll be fantastic. So most of y'all know I'm an attorney, but I also focused on military history at Texas A&M. Whoop. I always feel the best way to understand what we're dealing with currently is to take a look back to our past. So let's go back to the past and look at significant events in water and why it matters. So Egypt, they were the OGs, according to my son, of water infrastructure. They knew that their very livelihood had to have water, relied upon water. So they built canals, dams, reservoirs. They even had land reclamation projects all the way back there. 90% of their land is arid or desert-like. They also developed an ancient form of our modern flood gauges called a Nilometer, which measured water levels at the Nile and could help predict flooding. So I think that's pretty fantastic. Next slide shows a Nilometer. So you can see the, oh, okay. Irrigation, we are in this weird world of virtual speeches, so bear with me. You may also see my son run in the background or a giant golden retriever puppy. I apologize right now. Egyptians also were irrigation experts. The Nile was the source of life for all the Egyptians. They perfected a system of irrigation methods that manipulated the flows of the Nile. They used a sakia, which is a mechanical water well, and it was usually pulled by oxen or sometimes humans that lifted water from the Nile to provide constant flows that were needed for irrigation. They're still used in Egypt and India and are virtually identical to the ones that were found in ancient times. So another tool that the Egyptians used, next slide, was a shaduf. It's a very simple wooden tool consisting of a pole with a bucket at one end and a weight in the other, and it raised water above the Nile and diverted it into a canal or a ditch. It sounds so simple, but it really revolutionized irrigation in Egypt. Next slide, please. So Egyptians knew that clean water was essential to their survival. They discovered that adding aluminum sulfate to water trapped impurities and sediment by forming a gel that sinks to the bottom and was leaving clean water on top, therefore drinkable. Hikers and campers still use that method today, so I think that's pretty amazing. Next slide. Persia. So Persians made their desert bloom. They developed a Keynote system, which is a method of artificial irrigation that I'll talk about when we go into China as well. A Keynote system is an elaborate underground tunnel system for extracting groundwater in the dry mountain basins of present-day Iran. They hand-dug series of well-like vertical shafts connected by gently sloping tunnels. It delivered large amounts of subterranean water to the surface without a need for pumping. The water drained by gravity. Pretty amazing stuff. So this is a Keynote water system, and you can see that the shafts are built and everything is perfectly aligned. And I mean, the technology, even thousands of years ago, was just tremendous. Let's go to China. So the Chinese built the ancient Kariz well system in Turpan, which was the city of the Silk Route. So obviously they needed to have accessible water. They utilized that Keynote system that we just talked about with Persia also known as carez in Chinese culture, to pump groundwater from miles away on a gentle slope. The carez system is recognized for being one of the 3 major ancient engineering marvels in China. The first, of course, is the Great Wall. The second is the Beijing Great Canal. The distance between distance of meters between each 2 vertical wells was 20 to 70 meters. I mean, this was an engineering feat. And if you see that photo, that is a worker digging the tunnel, and the tunnels had to be as straight as possible to make sure that the water hit at the right level. Next slide, please. So the Romans are really fascinated with water. Their aqueduct system, I always say, is the Roman ancient SWIFT program. They suffered from very familiar problems. They had increased population growth. They had decreased water supply. Waterborne illnesses were flourishing as people moved to the cities and towns and populations grew, just like what we are facing in the United States. So the aqueducts played a very important role of bringing water, clean water, to its diverse populations. Most of y'all see the aqueducts as these very large structures, but the majority of them ran underground. There are 315 miles of aqueducts that supplied Rome, but really only 30 miles of those were actually visible. And most flow to a castilla or cisterns, and those are built at the highest point in the community and flowed to the population through a huge network of lead pipes. So providing clean water was considered a political necessity to Roman leadership. Public fountains, public and private baths, and running water to villas were hallmarks of Roman culture. Making sure that their growing population had kept unhappy citizens from rioting some of the time. And unlike us, they were meticulous about maintaining their infrastructure. The Romans actually had their own version of TCEQ. I don't know if Commissioner Lindley is watching this, but they did. The equari were essentially responsible for the aqueduct's water quality and operations. So this is very interesting. Private homes were charged for water based on the diameter of their access pipe, which led to scams where citizens placed a much larger pipe than they paid for. I always say hustlers are going to hustle, but time has shown the government will find you. The government solution and invention called the calyx, a sleeved pipe that fitted into the wall to prevent alterations. You're never going to fool the government. Aqueducts thrived until the siege of Rome by the Goths in 537 AD. Only 2 of the 13 aqueducts actually survived the siege. The world fell into a deep, dark abyss known as the Dark Ages. Thousands of years of water infrastructure expertise was completely lost. Rome also gave us the basis for the rule of capture. Most of y'all know that. Marcus Claudius Marcellus, who was a consul of Rome, who also unfortunately picked the wrong side in the civil war between Julius Caesar, Pompey, and Mark Antony. He picked Pompey, and I think lost his head over it, unfortunately. But he stated, no action, not even the action for fraud, can be brought against a person who, while digging on his own land, diverts a neighbor's water supply. So quick shout out to a fellow Texas Tech attorney, Dylan Drummond, has a fascinating article on the history of groundwater law in Texas. I highly recommend it. Look it up. It's very, very interesting. So let's dive into the sad Middle Ages. So the Great Conduit was another gravity-fed pipe that brought spring water 2.7 miles to a reservoir in the center of London. Now, why did I put this in here? I think what is remarkable about the Great Conduit is it was a feat in the Middle Ages, but the Romans had perfected this infrastructure thousands of years before. But also, even though the technology had been done before, how labor intensive this project was. All 2.7 miles of pipe were made out of tree trunks that were hollowed out and exactly matched to prevent leaking. And one other fun fact about the Great Conduit, in 1245, Edward I brought his new bride to see the marvel and had wine flowing through it to celebrate instead of water. My type guy. So let's go to the Renaissance era. A strange partnership between Leonardo da Vinci and Niccolo Machiavelli. Odd bedfellows, to say the least. Leonardo da Vinci, we all know him, inventor, painter, all-around genius. He was also obsessed with water. Machiavelli, heir to a very wealthy Florentine family, probably killed his brother, and wrote The Prince, basically a guidebook on how to be a corrupt politician. So much like the movie National Treasure starring screen legend Nicolas Cage, this pair decided to try to steal something far more crazy than the Declaration of Independence. They worked together to divert or steal the Arno River. The River Arno was the main water source for Florence as well as for Pisa. By stealing the Arno, Machiavelli and Da Vinci hoped to not only deprive Pisa of the ability to grow their own crops, bathe, and to basically still stay alive, but to irrigate the farmlands of Florence and to turn a profit by selling water to the local farmers. Additionally, the water would be diverted into a series of canals that made possible for ships to sail from Florence to the Mediterranean. It would be a real win for Florence and a death sentence for Pisa. The plan called for the construction of one wide channel deeper than the Arno itself, which when combined with the dam would divert the entirety of the river away from Pisa and into the Stagno, which was the marshland. The channel was intended to be 80 feet wide at its mouth and 64 feet wide at its end, 30 feet deep and a mile long. It was a huge construction project. So construction started on it, and the engineer discarded all of Da Vinci's plans and went with his own method, which failed miserably, and thousands of lives were lost. And they gave up the quest to steal the Arno River. So the 18th and 19th century, water fountains, important political symbols. What's old is new again. The Romans provided fountains and water for their citizens. In 19th century England, waterborne illnesses are everywhere again. The poor bought water from private water providers that was essentially just water from the extremely polluted Thames. Cholera was a very, very stark health problem. The Metropolitan Drinking Fountain Association opened up their first fountain in 1857. It was an immensely popular measure. Thousands came out to celebrate. And if you look closely at the painting of the fountain, you'll notice that the two adults are drinking out of cups, but we will talk more about those cups in a second. Next slide, please. Let's go to 19th and 20th century, New York City, facing the exact same problems as London, faced the exact same problems as Rome, dealing with public health issues such as cholera, but they were also grappling with a very interesting and very American issue, the temperance movement, which would envelop our country for at least a century. Both New York and the temperance movement were working in favor of instilling public water fountains throughout the city. Why do you ask? Why was the temperance movement so interested in public water fountains? Well, where is the place where workers would get fresh and clean hydration during the day? They would go to their local taverns and drink beer or liquor or whatever they had. They could not bring water with them. So temperance advocates thought more water fountains would help alleviate these issues. So 19th and 20th century. Let's get back to those pesky tin cups attached to the earliest public water fountains. By the early 20th century, most health experts realized that a tin cup, the common cup, was a terrible idea. Within 5 years, every state in the Union passed laws outlawing the common cup. See what we can do when we actually band together? So this led to a new water fountain design called the bubbler, where water shot straight up. So why was the bubbler design a problem? Well, it shot straight up, so most individuals put their mouths directly on top of the water fountain, which was almost as contaminated and truly disgusting as a common cup. So And fountain engineers spent years trying to come up with solutions. Many of them attached metal cages to the tops in an effort to keep people's lips off, but that was only partially effective because some of the people just started putting their lips on the mouth guards instead. So we eventually came to a slanted spigot, and that somewhat helped. Next slide, please. 20th century. Again, water is very personal. The water fountain became a symbol of Jim Crow and apartheid. So why does this all matter? So our future depends on our ability to learn from our past. Those are my two precious children, Henry and Heidi. They look cute, but they're both complete rascals. Next slide, please. So as history has shown us, civilizations either flourish or perish based on their access to clean water. And Texas is no different. We are growing by approximately 1,100 citizens each day. That's at least 550 natural births and 550 transplants. I always say most of them are from California, but who knows nowadays. Water is crucial to sustaining our growth. And there is no Texas miracle without water. We cannot continue to grow if we don't have the water resources we need. That much is certain. Next slide, please. So to quickly go into some groundwater bills that were passed during the 86th Texas legislature and our implementation. So of course, most of y'all know this, but we have HB 721 by Larson. That is a study on aquifer storage and recovery projects and the feasibility of them. We have 722, which is GCD permitting of brackish groundwater and brackish production zones, and SB 1041, which extends our bracks production zones. Next slide, please. So our ASR implementation. So we hired 3 employees to meet this mandate. We signed our contract with our contractor about 6 months ago, and we're very pleased what we've seen. In particular, we have a suitability rating tool for ASR. Is the area suitable? Is the location proper? And we have a visualization tool that has been outstanding. And we are on track, fingers crossed, to meet our mid-December deadline to submit the report to the legislature. And ASR has been a priority of leadership. You know, Senators Perry and Chairman Larson have talked about it quite a bit, so I'm very excited to see what the final draft looks like. Next slide, please. So 722, hired an employee to meet this mandate as well. We're working diligently on guidance documents to show how the agency will review the permit applications and the annual reports and evaluations of negative impacts. The rules are submitted to the Texas Register, and the comment period is open till September 21st, so take a look and please provide any comments. Other updates. The 5th, you know, we got almost $800 million appropriated by the legislature to help us combat flood and provide flood mitigation dollars through grants and loans to stakeholders. It was approved by voters in the November election. The abridged applications were due June 15th. Our agency received over 286 abridged applications with a total amount of $2.4 billion requested. Obviously, we don't have $2.4 billion, but we are excited to score those applications, and invitations to submit full applications will soon be out. Finally, the Interregional Planning Council, that's HB 807 by, of course, Chairman Larson, our beloved Chairman Larson, and Senator Buckingham. It requires the Texas Water Development Board to create an Interregional Planning Council. Interregional planning has been a priority of leadership. For the following purposes, they want to improve coordination among regional planning groups, and they want to improve coordination between each regional group and my agency. And we want to facilitate dialogue on water management strategies that could affect multiple planning areas. Regional planning groups are encouraged to make legislative recommendations, of course. Next slide. So we appointed 16 members in January. We've had 6 virtual, of course, council meetings since April, and I will tell you they are very lively. Try to attend one if you can. We've created 3 committees, enhancing interregional coordination, planning water resources for the state as a whole, and general best practices for future planning. And the council will reconvene and write a report and issue recommendations for in the coming months. Next slide. I think that's it. I'm happy to answer any quick questions. I also wanted to give Carmen Chernashak of TWDB a shout out. It's her birthday month and we have to celebrate her all month. It's mandatory. I basically signed a contract agreeing to that when I took over as a board member. So happy birthday, Carmen.
That's great, Brooke. Thank you so much. I apologize for the technical difficulties we had. All of our attendees had the joy of getting to rejoin again, just so they're ready to go, and it's going to go quick tomorrow morning. We actually did have a couple questions come in that I will pose to you if you don't mind.
Sure.
The first was, how has COVID affected the regional and state water planning process?
Oh, well, that's a really great question. First, I'd like to say that I think that the Texas Water Development Board has done a really terrific job in just learning how to work at home in a very efficient manner. So I think the only way I've seen any sort of issues is just trying to get all the groups together virtually has been challenging, and making sure that those meetings are happening, but they are. I don't think that there will be any real delays. Everyone knows that regional water planning is essentially important to the state, and the state water plan cannot be late. So I think we've been doing a fine job.
That's great. No, and I know from personal experience how quickly you all pivoted and were up and running at full capacity when one day everyone was all of a sudden at home. It was an impressive thing to watch. So that's been great.
It was a very stressful week just trying to get everyone at home and safe. And I mean, it was very surreal, but I mean, our executive leadership rose to the challenge and really got everyone comfortable. And now we're just ticking along.
Yeah, well, I think rising to the challenge is something the Development Board has always been known for. When you get all of these different mandates coming in the door and reports and studies you need to get done, it's amazing. It's the science that we all depend on. And so we so appreciate with all you do. Thank you for your really interesting, thoughtful, and entertaining presentation. Nyla meters, banning the cup, Nicolas Cage, you got them all in there. That was fantastic. And we're so glad to have you join us this year. Thank you, Director Paup.